Okay, so let's get started. So I want to reassure you, this is not a car commercial. All right, so stay with me on this. How many of you know what car brand this is? Raise your hands. Come on, somebody. No? Okay, if I say BYD, does that ring a bell? How many of you have? Do you know what it stands for? Build your dreams. Where's it from? China, good old China. All right. So, and what do you think about it? Anyone? Yay, nay. Okay, all right. Okay. So, basically, in 2011, about 10 years ago, this is what Elon Musk has to say about BYD when interviewed about it.
Although there's competitors now ramping up, and as you're familiar with BYD, which is also on the West Coast, I think they're ramping up production of their electric vehicles. Warren Buffett owns 10% stake in that. Why do you laugh? BYD is trying to compete. Why do you laugh?
Have you seen their car?
Have you seen their car? Come on. How can BYD be even something we can discuss, right? So, in 2024, BYD overtakes Tesla and is crowned the new electric car king. And Elon Musk is going around begging the European regulators to please put trade barriers. Because if there are no trade barriers established, they, BYD, will pretty much demolish most other car companies in the world. They're extremely good. Have you seen their car? Indeed. So, you know, this is not unusual. This is one example among many stories about how the West overestimates itself and underestimates the rest of the world. And why is that so? Look, I get it. We have a lot of media stories in our head, which is sort of baked into our imagination in the way we see the world, right? So let's do a thought experiment, shall we? If I tell you a word, try to picture it. So if I say African child, what comes to your head? Just picture an African child. Is this something that perhaps pops into your mind? Or if I say somewhere in India, like an urban area in India, what do you think? Take a minute to picture an Indian city, right? Maybe it's something that comes up like this, right? Chaos, messy, dirty. Or is this what you think about when I say Mexico beyond the sombreros and tequila? Maybe you've just watched Queen of the South, 100,000 cartel TV series, right? So look, I'm not saying that these are not realities. But I'm just saying this is one part of a very complex story that we really need to pay attention to. Otherwise, you're going to miss the big picture. So take the case of China. China, you know, it's in the headlines, there are two main narratives. The US, China, trade war, blah, 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 and Chinese authoritarianism. But here's a story that we keep seeming to miss, which is that China, in the 70s and 80s, was one of the poorest countries in the world. And today, it is the second biggest economy in the world today. So what it did was bring out the largest number of people out of poverty in the shortest amount of time. And they did something else which is really mind-blowing, and which no other country in the world did, is that they managed to come up with a formidable and competitive tech industry to compete with Silicon Valley with their deep pockets and their network effects. And what this does, basically, and signals to the rest of the world, particularly the global south, which is why they want to be a China and not the United States, is that you can, with limited resources, become global leaders of change. How is that not a hopeful story, right? So the global south is no longer what it used to be. And when I say the global south, I'm talking about 85% of the world's population and 90% of young people in the world today live in these regions, in countries in Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia, right? How can we manage to get their stories wrong, particularly because they are the global user base, they are where the consumers are, and in the foreseeable future, that's where businesses and services are going to be developing and innovating, right? The young of today and tomorrow are in these regions. So, you know, I was born and brought up in India from a place called Bangalore, and I went to an Irish convent school with dreadful, horrifying nuns, because it was one of the few schools which were decent in India. And I grew up under the license Raj. Does anyone know what the license Raj is? No? Well, it was good old times in the 70s and 80s because basically the Indian government had exclusive right to dictate who could sell goods and what kind of goods at what prices under a limited permit system. So what that basically did was had skyrocket, sort of pricing, a huge scarcity, and long wait lines. My family waited for 11 years for the first telephone connection. We had 3 television channels, when we grew up, and a bike was a luxury good. So today, the mobile internet, the countries with the cheapest mobile internet is where? India's one, other countries? Vietnam, Cambodia, Israel. These are where it is the cheapest. It's not in Europe, except for Italy. So we need to find out what's happening there. So Bitcoin, the countries that have the highest number of cryptocurrency and crypto ownership is UAE and Vietnam, among others, and are at the forefront. East Asia, particularly, is at the forefront of fintech, right? And India has gone ahead and built something absolutely fabulous, which is called the digital public infrastructure. And I'll tell you why you all should be really excited, because this benefits us all and why we can be hopeful about it. You see, if you're a digital entrepreneur, you have to, firstly, your margins are really, slim, right? And you have to pay these mafia-like prices of 20 to 30% commission to the likes of Android and iOS, right? And on top of it, they are black box in how they function. On the other hand, the IndiaStack is built on open source, and it's available for any entrepreneur in the world to run their apps for free, right? So it is basically what Europe has been trying to do for decades, with their deep resources, and India has gone ahead with a fraction of their resources. And this should give us a lot of hope, because this is basically pushing against the big tech and getting the damn market to start working again, right? So what is happening? If we pay attention, we'll see the Indian government collaborating with Proces, which used to be called NASPER, in the Netherlands, to foster entrepreneurship, because you need a level playing field, and this is one of the level playing fields. And Europe should take note. So I'm a digital anthropologist, which is just a fancy way of saying that I look at how people use digital media, the whole UX aspect, but in a very focused area. I look at young people in Nigeria, India, Brazil, and other parts of the world, and how they are playing with these apps, experimenting and innovating, right? And I wrote a book called The Next Billion Users a couple of years ago, and since then I've been working with a lot of more tech startups around the world, and it's one thing I can confidently say and double down on is that the young people around the world, particularly in the global south, are absolutely optimistic about technologies despite the challenges. Nobody's saying there aren't challenges, but they're very optimistic, and here is why, right? First is that they're young. They're not old fogies like me. They are super enthusiastic. When you're young, you're optimistic by nature because you have you have your world ahead of you, right? And when you're young, you also want to be entertained, self-actualized, and guess what's one of the biggest drivers of getting on the internet is sex, porn, romance, dating, and you have to understand that majority of these young people live in deeply conservative societies where most of them will have arranged marriages and never date. So the online is their only option to find companionship online. Second, they don't want to do what their parents do. You know, they don't want to be a farmer, they don't want to be a herder, they don't want to be a cleaner. They have bigger picture for themselves, which is why they're taking to the digital to carve it out for themselves. This is why many global South countries are at the forefront of the creator economy and are embracing crypto, embracing everything new and experimenting, right? Because their future lies with the digital. That's how they see it. And third is they want more privacy, and you have to just picture this now. The average young person in the global South lives in a one-room home with 3 generations sleeping, next to each other. They step out, and all the neighbors know them and watch everything they say and do. So relative to that, they have more privacy online. So basically, what they want is that the digital allows them a little more freedom to live, love, and and learn. And they are innovating with this kind of optimism. And we see this happening, oops. Why is this not working? So, all right, anyways, so I will proceed, but maybe somebody could help me with this. I seem to have a jinxed, experience here about clickers. So anyway, all right, great. So, all right, so they've gone ahead and started innovating. And these are just some examples, right? So Editrix and Lilapa are 2 such startups. Well, one is from India and one is from Africa. And Editrix is basically using AI to, give affordable and quality editing at for its population. And Lilapa is building localized applications, to address the solutions for problems. Now, in these contexts, so what's new about it? What's so big? We have startups, right? Here's the difference. They are pioneering their own large language models in their multiple languages and dialects because that's a huge data deficit. We don't have that. Just India alone has 22 different languages and thousands of dialects, right? We have accents. So they have manpower to train these large language models. And what this means is they're going to have far more accurate AI-based applications than any of us because they have the localized knowledge and the tools to train the AI to cater to this population, which again, let me remind you, 90% of the young people live in these regions. They are the markets, right, of today and the future. So, and Angami is a music streaming platform in the Middle East, and they are experimenting and the first of the kind to put AI-generated music on their platforms, hundreds of them. And they're also using AI to, check on creative provenance and ownership because they're under serious pressure because of copyright infringement. So they're experimenting and designing new business models as we speak because this is what is needed in today's time. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. So this is just one of the many examples, right? And these are the faces of innovation in India, Lebanon, South Africa. We have the numbers to back it too. More than 9 to 10 in 10 people in Kenya, Mexico, China, Nigeria, and India are optimistic about their futures. Not so in Sweden, France, and Australia, and Great Britain. In fact, when asked about how much positive impact, if any, do you think AI is currently having, this is a large-scale survey, across the world last year, And they were asked about AI and the way we access information, treat diseases, the way we learn, the way we work. And as you can see, again, emerging markets are very enthusiastic and optimistic about AI's impact, unlike those in Europe and the United States, right, across domain. So what's going on, right? So there seems to be a growing pessimism. In fact, the Economist asked, why are American progressives so sad? In fact, the Gallup poll takes it even further and shows that Americans are far more negative about the future of AI, the future of their democracy, their society, and as compared to even a decade ago, right? So if you think about it, this doesn't make sense because the EU and the US are still some of the wealthiest regions in the world, right? And also, we have something which is really precious, which is that we live in a liberal democracy despite the politics. And you have to remember, less than 7% of the world's countries today have liberal democracies. So we have that amazing gift of freedom on top of it. So why do we feel we have far less, even though we have far more, right? What's really happening? Is it because there's a sense of loss of empire, right? The classic Brexit case where they were shocked when the Commonwealth didn't follow them and instead chose Europe because they thought the colonies somehow had a, mother link to them or something. You're like, gee, I don't know why the Indians don't love us still after 2 centuries of colonial rule. Or is it perhaps because, there's a loss of respect globally? I mean, the Americans had something like 80, 85% of GDP a couple of decades ago of the world, and today it's less than in the 40s. 40%, 45%. So yes, it's a lot, less money, less power, less influence, as we can see in the politics also playing out. Or is it because it's a loss of control? Because all these immigrants are coming and it's a change of life, it's a change of language, change of cultural values. It's too much. You can't control it. Is that it? I could come up with an alternative narrative to counter this. I could say that, 36% of all US patents, up to now, have been driven by immigrants in the United States. Did you know that? And also, one could say, well, if Europe wants to continue in the innovation race, they need to embrace their immigrants. But I would be falling into the opposite end and coming up with another simplistic, singular narrative as if the other concerns don't matter. And I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we have a complex, rich story, and we need to attend to the positives, which is why I wrote this book. I infuse it with all other such examples of why we need to be optimistic, because there's a lot going on, particularly in the global south, because they're hungry for change. They're at the forefront of the climate crisis. They're the ones that are going to be the most impacted. They cannot afford to, be relaxed because they have a significant young population. Africa, many parts of Africa have, on average, 60 to 70% of their population is less than 25 years old. If they don't come up with something new, they will have civil war. So there's a survival aspect at stake which we don't have, right? So they have the youth dividend, they have the urgency, and there's so much we can learn from if we start to listen. Because we can borrow the digital public infrastructure, we can borrow these ideas. Good ideas anywhere in the world should be embraced, because guess what? We need all hands on deck because we have far bigger fish to fry. We have the climate crisis, we need to do tech reform, economic reform, we need to address global inequality, and we need peace, right? So we have a lot of stuff going on, and we can't afford to have this binary mentality of us versus them, ask questions like, is AI good or bad? Is the Global South imitators or innovators? It's irrelevant at this point because we need any good idea. And guess what? Very rarely do good ideas come from a point of despair, right? I mean, pessimism is a privilege for those who can afford to be in despair. So I hope you will join me in becoming, optimistic and getting your hopes up and partner with the Global South because it's time to get positive again, all right? So looking forward to engaging with you all, and thank you for listening.
Payal, you can stick around for a second?
The clicker.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It must be me and the clicker relationship. Deep.
It's a Silicon Valley clicker, not a Global South
Damn
one.
you.
That's the problem. Pessimism is a privilege. I think there's a lot of power in that idea. But, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of the conversation about AI, in terms of the critical conversation about it, is intended to protect privacy, to protect people in general from mass unemployment, from societal breakdowns, all that kind of stuff. Are you not worried about any of that with respect to all the optimism that you have in the Global South?
So, here's the thing. I'm a rational optimist, much like a lot of the youth out there. And the thing is, with all this pessimism conversation, or concern, shall we say deep concern, right? There are thinkers and leaders who are saying, oh my God, AI is going to destroy our world. It's destroying our mental well-being, destroying our democracy. And while they're, chirping about that and how we've lost all sense of ourselves, they're wearing their Apple Watches, sharing that to their millions of followers. I'm just saying, come on, start at an honest point. You are using these technologies, you're using your Google Maps. Why the hypocrisy, right? If you want to give up all of that and then talk, then we can have an honest conversation. But none of them are having an honest conversation because they're not acknowledging why people do what they do despite these risks.
I don't know. Is it fair to say that people have to go back to the Stone Age in order to have an intellectual, challenging conversation about...
It's an honest... there's a difference between a challenging and an honest conversation. An honest conversation will say that, yes, we have these technologies, they are providing us some really amazing benefits, but we need strong guardrails. Now look, I'm not going to, why do people always assume that if I'm positive about something, that I dismiss the fears? It's this binary thinking that if I tell you I love you, does that mean that you're perfect? No, of course not. I mean, which relationship has worked on that? I mean, nobody's perfect. So basically it's a relationship, right? And we know what it takes to have a good relationship. It needs work, it needs boundaries, it needs a communication of what's fair, what's, true, and to be honest with each other. And this is all I'm asking is, let's have a relationship with technology starting with what is putting people at the center, particularly those who are the most vulnerable. Because if they are the ones who are optimistic besides the risks, we owe it to them, right?
And just very briefly while we wrap up, if we do put people at the center as a kind of a call to action for people here in the audience, these are a lot of decision makers, people with big networks. Everyone can play a reforming role when it comes to a more inclusive internet. And tech industry in general, what could everyone be doing?
Well, to start with, look, in the last few years, I've been talking to so many tech companies and beyond, and they're constantly surprised that the Global South has anything to offer but their data. So we need to get that mind. If I can do one thing, is to change that mindset and say that not only are they worth looking at past their data, but actually they can be partners, innovators, creators, and we can learn from them. Oh my God, God forbid, right? Then maybe we can together move forward to address some of the big issues we face today. That's it, right?
Beautiful. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.